A stranger came early in February through a biting wind and a driving snow into the coach and horses, walking from Bramblehurst railway station, and demanded, "In the name of human charity, a room and a fire." A guest stopping at Epping village in the winter time was an unheard of piece of luck, and so Mrs. Hall, the owner of the inn, without taking his identity, allotted him a parlour and carried the clothes, plates and glasses into it. She was surprised to see that her visitor still wore his hat and coat, despite that the fire was burning up briskly in the room and that his head and face were thoroughly bandaged.
"Can I take your hat and coat, sir, and give them a good dry in the kitchen?"
No, I prefer to keep them on.
"Very well, sir. As you like. In a bit the room will be warmer. Your lunch is served, sir."
Thank you.
When Mrs. Hall came again in the room with a mustard pot, the stranger was eating, and his overcoat and hat had been taken off and put over a chair in front of the fire.
"I suppose I may have them to dry now."
Leave the hat.
"I didn't know, sir, that
Thank you.
the poor souls had an accident or an operation or something."
Mrs. Hall once again went to the parlour when the clock jobber, Teddy Henfrey, came to the inn.
"Would you mind, sir, this man are coming to look at the clock, sir?"
Look at the clock. Certainly. Good afternoon.
I hope that it's no intrusion.
None whatever. Though I understand that this room is really to be mine for my own private use.
"I thought, sir, you'd prefer the clock."
Certainly, certainly. But as a rule, I like to be alone and undisturbed. But I'm really glad to have the clock seen to. Yeah, very glad.
The weather...
Why don't you finish and go? All you've got to do is to fix the hour hand on its axle. You're simply humbugging.
Certainly, sir. 1 minute more. I overlooked...
Mr. Henfrey finished and went, but he went feeling excessively annoyed and met Mr. Hall on the road. Mr. Hall drove the Epping conveyance when occasional people required it to Sidderbridge Junction.
Damn it. A man must do a clock at times, surely. Can't a man look at you? Ugly. Seemingly can't if the police was wanting you. You couldn't be more wrapped and bandaged. My sakes, Mr. Hall. You got a rum up home?
What's that?
Rum-looking customer stopping at a coach and horses. It looks a bit like a disguise, don't it? I would like to see a man's face if I had him stopping in my place. But women are that trustful, where strangers are concerned. He's took your rooms, and he ain't even given a name, Hall.
You don't say so.
He's got a lot of luggage coming tomorrow, so he says.
What?
My aunt at Hastings was swindled by a stranger in the like manner.
The seeds of suspicion were sown perfectly in Mr. Hall's mind by Mr. Henfrey. However, Mr. Hall only dared to say when retiring for the night to Mrs. Hall.
Look very closely at the stranger's luggage when it comes tomorrow.
"You mind your own business, Hall, and I'll mind mine."
The stranger's cartload of trunks, crates and boxes arrives finally, The stranger comes out to receive it, but a mishap happens.
Come along with those boxes. I've been waiting long enough.
Whoop! Lie down!
The kind-hearted Mr. Hall, on seeing the stranger attacked by the dog, went headlong, following him to his room, and finding the doors ajar, entered it without ceremony. He caught a glimpse of what seemed a handless sleeve waving towards him in the dim light, and he saw a face of 3 huge, indeterminate spots on white, like a pale pansy flower. Then he was struck violently in the chest, hurled back, and the door slammed in his face and locked. Griffin had unpacked his crates and boxes and spread his bottles of all sizes all over the place, on the table and the floor, and when Mrs. Hall pointed to the mess he had created, he suggested the compensation could be charged in his bill.
Oh my God! Oh my God, what a mess! You have spoiled the place!
Don't worry. You can charge me a shilling each time you find such a mess.
The stranger worked very fitfully. On other times, he would rise late and while away his time pacing in the room, fretting audibly, and sleeping in the armchair by the fire. He communicated with none and rarely went abroad by daylight. At twilight, he would go out muffled up invisibly and appear suddenly, giving a scare to men and children. When people talked about him, Mrs. Hall explained him as an experimental investigator, while others suspected him to be a criminal trying to escape from justice. Yet others felt that he was rather a harmless lunatic. Later, some supernatural stories were also floated. When the word reached the village general practitioner, Cuss, that the stranger possessed 1001 bottles of rare chemical, he felt jealous of the stranger and went to interview him.
I've heard you take an interest in scientific things. We are raising funds for the village nurse. Would you subscribe?
I'd consider it.
Are you researching?
I am.
A long research?
A damnable long research.
Oh, you must have been given permission. Most valuable prescription?
Yes.
Is it medical?
Damn you. What are you fishing after?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you.
Look, here it is. I'd read it. 5 ingredients. Put it down.
There was a prescription burning, wasn't it? How the devil can you move an empty sleeve like that?
Empty sleeve?
Yes, an empty sleeve.
It's an empty sleeve, is it? You saw it was an empty sleeve. Are you sure? Think again.
After this strange experience, Cuss was not in a condition to stay there any further. He rushed straight to the vicarage, where the village vicar, Bunting, lived. When he narrated the entire story, and then something from the sleeve pinched his nose, as if between the thumb and the forefinger, the vicar laughed heartily and called it a very strange story. It was not easy to convince anyone that Cuss had seen a man whose hand was invisible. Let's see in other modules how the truth of the stranger reveals gradually on other people in the village of Epping, and how things get complex and complex.